Hello, I'm Sarah. This is Hardcover Hearts, and this is my week of reading wrap-up where I talk about the books that I read last week, what I'm currently reading, and plan to read next week based on my mood. I completed a lot of books, so I have a lot to talk about, so let's kind of jump right into it, shall we? The first is a continuation of the Rougon Macau series that I'm doing with Leo of Leo's Little Book Life. I'd like to welcome him back to BookTube if you haven't heard. I'll put a link to his channel below. This work is by Emile Zola, and it's a 20-volume series, 20-something volume series that is just magnificent. This is book number 5, I think. And this is The Sin of Abbé Mouret, and this was translated by Valerie Minogue. I don't have as great covers as Leo has. His covers are outstanding. If you look on his Instagram page, the Dutch translated versions are saucy. They're perfect, perfectly encompassing what it's like to actually read a Zola novel. This, though, I have to say, was a departure. This one felt much more Proustian to me than it actually felt like one of Zola's previous work. And we know that Abbé Mouret, Serge Moray, his mother found herself in the throes of religious fervor when a priest came to live with their family when he was young. That was the previous book, The Conquest of Plaisance. In this book, we have Serge being grown up. He's come out of the convent and he's been assigned to an abbey in this little village. It's very impoverished. It's barely holding together. No one really comes. It's kind of a backwaters type of rural environment. And there's not a lot of respect for religion and for priests here. But you know what? That's really okay with Serge Moray because he is a kind of a hermit. He would prefer not to deal with people. He would prefer to sit in contemplation all day. He would prefer to lay prostrate and beg and imagine the Virgin Mary. He has also these tendencies for obsession and compulsion and religious fervor that his mother had. One day when he's out doing his rounds and meeting some of the people in his town, he sees his uncle, and his uncle grabs him to take him to meet some people that he knows that he finds interesting. And that is this man and his niece. And his niece was educated, was brought up very, very well. And upon the death of her parents, she has come to live in Paradou, which is the caretaker's home kind of on the outskirts of this magnificent estate. So her uncle is the caretaker, and he's old in years and has stayed away from the church because he doesn't trust it. He thinks it's nonsense. And so therefore, Serge has never met this family. He is immediately struck at the beauty of this woman because she has kind of embraced the natural world and runs and has explored everything in this gigantic garden and estate. And it's kind of jolted him to have these kinds of feelings and interest. He goes back to his abbey and he has some of the funniest interactions with this woman, very Proustian type of housekeeper. This is Latouche, and she feels so similar to Françoise of In Search of Lost Time, if you've read any Proust. So the same kind of possessiveness and humor and no nonsense approach to things. She has that as well. And she's like, be careful because that woman's wild and that family's wild. And she tries to keep distance. Well, Serge ends up having a very challenging illness. And the doctor takes him out of the abbey and puts him into the care of Albine. Albine is that young woman that was been running wild, living very idyllic life in Paradou. Albine, Albertine, also Proustian reference. And at that point, Serge has been kind of in a coma, and he comes out of this, and he doesn't remember anything. He has amnesia, and he's completely falls in love with Albine, and it's really nature that kind of guides them together. And so then we have this Adam and Eve type of reference. Now, as you can imagine, it's going to have disastrous consequences. But what we find in this section, all of a sudden, it goes very heavy blocks of text, very Proustian, very much about detailing every single flower, every minute little grain, every leaf, every tree, anything that exists in this garden is cataloged, is described. It's very sensory. It's very much about creating this, like I said, catalog of this remarkable place, this idyllic place. That was hard. That I have to admit, that was a little hard to read because I wasn't expecting it. Beautiful nature writing, but it's very dense. It's very thick, and that, along with some of the internal wrangling that Serge does when he realizes and comes back to his senses and leaves Paradou to go back to the Abbey. Those were also very dense, very thick, seemingly like it was a bit unnecessary. So this is a very different style of writing than Zola has done previously. And it really did slow everything down almost to this plodding type of pace, like we're in quicksand. I do love when he brings in characters, and his dialogue and his descriptions of place are always fantastic, but this one was harder to deal with. Though I did really love Albine as a character, and really her rejection of his rejection of her by recognizing that he was obsessed with what she saw, and what Zola really articulated was like a death cult. That he was spending all this time surrounded by images of horror in the Abbey. It was dark, it was frightening, and as opposed to all the light and beauty and nature that existed outside in Paradou, and even just outside the walls. So I think for Zola to write something like that is remarkable. I mean, this was published in 1875. So I imagine this to be probably a very revolutionary, shocking, bold take on the question of religion versus nature. It was, for that in of itself, it gets great marks. I just wish some of that writing had been a little stripped back, a little edited, a little more condensed. But again, Zola, fantastic. Now, I finished this with my group read. This is Lightning Rods by Helen DeWitt. So as you may know, I'm doing a project where I'm reading authors' works in publication order with a group of people. We read Shirley Hazard before, and we're doing Helen DeWitt now. And this one has shocked me, lightning indeed. This is satire. I think I've made mention before that I am not someone who enjoys satire. This was hard for me to get into, both because of the satire style, and also the material is about sexual harassment. And it is aggressively bold. It is, I would actually say, aggressively provocative, and really pushes all of the subject matter to the furthest degree. Even where I didn't think she was going to go, she went there. So the main story here is we have Joe, who is a failed salesman. He tried first with Encyclopedia Britannica sales, didn't do well. He then moved on to something more practical, vacuum cleaners, did not do well. And it's while he's in his home, impoverished, fantasizing and pleasuring himself, quite literally, that he comes up with this idea that top earners should not have to spend their time in sexually frustrated. They should be given a benefit of access to sex. And wouldn't that make the workplace so much better? Because then people could just get on with their jobs. But we don't want to harass the women, so it should be kind of confidential. And so he pulls in this element of his fantasy, which is the glory hole. I know, I was as shocked as you were. And so the idea that this anonymous sex as reward for the top performers in a sales organization really catches hold in his mind, and he starts to sell it. And it takes off. And there are corporations that buy this. And I'll let you just kind of imagine where it goes from there. And I guarantee you it's going to go in places you didn't expect. I almost quit my own party. I think I made mention. I stayed with it because there are people who are in this group that love satire and were able to help me stay with it and kind of explore satire with others who gained something that I would never have seen from the text. And so through that exercise, I appreciated what Helen DeWitt was doing, which is, she did not let her foot off the gas at any single point. However, what this does though is this doesn't really change, right? The voice and tone, and it's very one note, and it's the same throughout the entire book. It's taking this preposterous idea and to the fullest extent possible. So if you like satire, she's an amazing writer, very, very in tune with her craft. If you are not put off by the topic, this might be something that you would enjoy. I will leave it at that. So the next book I was really, really amped about. So very excited for this because of how much I loved her previous work. So this is Claudia Piñiero's A Little Luck, translated by Frances Riddle. So her previous work is Elena Knows, and I have it somewhere here. I just didn't grab it, unfortunately. I will say Elena Knows was by far my favorite book of last year for how unexpected it was, for the plot twists, for the intensity of the writing, the intensity of the point of view, and the full immersion that I felt reading that book. And I may be an outlier here, but I didn't have the same experience with this one. This is much more straightforward. There weren't as many twists and turns and things that popped up, or if they did, it was subtler. This is more like an unraveling of something as opposed to a book that has a lot of twists and things that you didn't see. This is a story of a woman. Mary has been living in Boston for the past 20 years. Something happened to her when she was younger, and she fled Buenos Aires and set up an entirely new life for herself, including a new look, new eye color, and has really pushed her past to the background as she's moved forward. Upon the death of her husband, she is assigned a job to go back to Buenos Aires, to actually the same neighborhood that she worked in, and to do an evaluation of this school, because her work now is about education, and she works with an academy kind of thing that has different outposts across the world, but very, very high standards. And so she's going there to do an audit, do an investigation to see if this school is up to the standards that they expect and can get accreditation from their program. And this is something that is going to force her to confront truths about what happened and and look into her past in a way that she's avoided. I thought, don't get me wrong, this was incredibly well written. This is where my expectations going in were different than what I received. And so because of that, I think while it was a good book, it didn't give me the punch that I think other people have felt in reading this. It was beautifully written. It was powerful, but I think I had some questions. I don't understand how she said that she has a new face, but it was never really explained what that meant. And so there were some kind of fundamental things that I wasn't clear on, that I kept questioning as I was reading it. I think it was a good book. I think she's a great writer. I think she deserves all the accolades coming to her, but this was just a good book to me, but did not rise to the level that Elena Knows did, unfortunately. Then I did a book on audio that I saw kind of out there. I think Leo had made mention something of this to me. And I looked for it in my library system and sure enough found it and got this on audio. This book is called Wifedom, Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life, and it's by Anna Funder. I have some conflicting thoughts about this book. On one hand, I'm very excited to finally know a little bit about his wife, Eileen Orwell, and a little bit about her background, about what she did to hold the marriage together, her contributions to his work, and just who she was as a person. It turns out that new letters have been found, letters that she wrote to other people, which otherwise we would never know anything about her, because Orwell never really talked about her as a human being, as a separate entity from him in his writings. It was always, if she was mentioned, it was my wife, and there was no identification of her contribution to his life, other than just her presence. And it turns out she did a lot for him. She held him together. She took on work when he was unable to, because he had a lot of illnesses. She saved him over and over again from bad decisions, from poverty, from bad health, from his own nature in some cases. And he was cruel and not very kind to her. He seems to have been a narcissist, someone who his needs were much more important than anyone else's. He had tuberculosis and would not even bat an eye at spending time with people and potentially infecting them. He expected her to basically support him and anything that he wanted, physically, mentally, in their home, in their bed, even if he wanted to sleep with other people. And that became a very big bone of contention, and something that was very difficult in the marriage. So yeah, he was miserly, sadistic, inhumane. He's kind of a jerk. And while I loved understanding that information, this book does something that I find a little strange. Number one, it introduces the author through these kind of essay-like vignettes about how she has found this material, what she feels as she's finding it, and how does this intersect with her understanding of Orwell, who is an author that she loved otherwise. Before she found this out, she really held him on a pedestal. But then all of a sudden it's her conflict, which is perfectly fine. But then what she would do is she would have these scenes that almost imagined, like fictionalized, what their life could have been like based on what she has just found and the other information that she knew about, biographical information about Orwell, where he was at the time, what he was doing. And I don't know that worked for me. in one hand, I liked her voice and tone and how she was presenting this material and her reflections on the material. But then all of a sudden we launched into fantasy land, and we launched into this imaginary space that I was always aware was imaginary. So on one hand, this book could have been a fictionalized account with footnotes, with citations of new information that could have bolstered the conversation. Or it could have been a nonfiction solely on her feelings of finding this and what she's going through, her personal experience in as she's going through this. But the combination of the two felt strange to me. And then there was this other thing, and this was just in the narration, in the audio, that drove me batty. And it was that as we were going from one voice to the other, there was like this music, like a scene change music. And I didn't need that. We had different voices. It was strong enough of a difference to be able to know what section you were in. And I thought it baffled me. I didn't understand why it was there. So yeah, I would love to know if you've read this, what were your thoughts? But I think the material was so good. It was the presentation and the combination of how it was done that I'm still not settled on. All right, but let's talk about a book that I think was fantastic. This is something that I was reading for Shorty September and my Women in Translation Redo month. And this is A Silence Shared by Lalla Romano. And this was translated from Italian by Brian Robert Moore. Really beautiful cover that has like this kind of veiled effect of this woman in profile. I'm not sure if you can see it here. So this is set in World War II in northern Italy. And we have Julia. Julia is a translator. She and her husband have had to evacuate her, and they have come to stay in this little village that her cousins live in, two older spinster cousins. And they are kind of struggling to make a life for themselves here and just really survive. Her husband, Stefano, keeps going back to Turin to do some work. And so often she's left alone with her two cousins. She meets a woman, Ada, and her husband, Paolo, and they are also city people. And she finds Ada kind of like luminous and radiating. Ada is just one of those characters that just always has an ability to be happy, even in difficult circumstances. But she's very curious about Paolo, who seems taciturn, reserved. Sometimes it's almost like he's not seeing what's happening, kind of withdrawn. And it turns out that Paolo has a very severe illness that keeps him kind of remote. It's never really defined. I'm not really sure what it is. If anybody's read this and knows, please let me know. Feels bronchial. He's asthmatic, but it also creates like these feverish dreams where he's not always there. She ends up helping to take care of Paolo and getting drawn into their family at a time when she's really lacking one. And it's really about class, the differences in class, because they come from more money than Julia and her husband do. It's also about similarities. So she and Paolo have more in common than she has with Stefano, her husband. And whereas Ada and Stefano have more in common. And so there's that aspect of it. There's also aspect of found family and community and care. Like how do you care for people who are very different than you, that you probably wouldn't in normal circumstances be as connected to, but yet you're thrown in for survival. and how do you make the most of that? I found this to be tender. There's like a mist, a gauziness to the writing. There is tenderness, a thoughtful compassion, and a beauty about relationships, and the variations of the relationships in this book that I found beautiful. I think the translation was lovely, and I just thought this was a beautiful, beautiful book. Okay, so that's what I completed. Let me show you what I'm currently in motion with. So I am reading this book for trying to finish out the week of a Shorty September and Spinster September, and my Women in Translation redo month strong. This will be for Shorty September. This is A Sunday in Ville by Dominique Barbéris, and it is translated by John Cullen. So this would be Women in Translation in Shorty September. And so far it's lovely. It's a book about a woman who has a difficult relationship with her sister. And one is suburban, the other is urban. She's the urban one who travels from Paris to the suburbs, but she's reflecting on the relationship and the differences between them. Very meditative, quiet type of book. Interested in it. I'm only about not even a third of the way through yet. I also need to start this book. This is Some Trick. This is the continuation of the Helen DeWitt author series. So I'm going to be reading 3 of the short stories in this, and then starting to prep for Victober. So I'll have a video about my pile of possibilities for that soon. So that's it. As you can see, I've read a ton, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week. But as always, I would love to know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were. And if any of these books, for the specifically ones I liked, if they are prompting any thoughts of books that you think I should also read. So yeah, hope you have a great reading week, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week. Bye-bye.